Well, welcome. Well, today I'm chatting with Lisa Brown. Nice to have you here, Lisa.
Nice to be here, Stephen. Nice to see you again.
You too. Now, Lisa is the Acting Principal Legal Advisor for Legal Services, Compliance and Governance with MPI, and I know has been a great supporter of the College of Law and our Health and Wellbeing program. So it's really good to have a chat to you today.
Yeah, we really appreciated College of Law coming to Dunedin and providing some training on the subject, Stephen, from you personally when you came down here and delivered that to local practitioners in Otago. So
Oh,
yeah, it's
thank
great
you.
to be able to see you again and to talk on a subject that I know you're very passionate about, and it's dear to
Yeah.
my heart as well.
Oh, thank you. Yes, it was a great session and really encouraged by the enthusiasm and the participation. Yeah. So, Lisa, as we're all aware, we've had phenomenal change that many of us could never even have anticipated. So, given what we've been through, what are your thoughts on where you see kind of the New Zealand and the law psyche at the moment and where we're currently at?
Well, I think after the initial sort of sense of panic, I guess, and anxiety, we've kind of come through things somewhat. I think from what I have seen, there's been some really good agility, some really new innovative ways of working, which we've all experienced, I guess, across the profession. I definitely don't think we're out of the woods yet. I think there's still a great deal of uncertainty. For many people, a lot of people are concerned about their financial well-being. They're losing jobs. We don't know, we're all facing budget cuts. I work in government, so no surprises there. So that of course means having to look at different and new ways of working, and of course change always brings a certain sense of anxiety for some. Some people are better at dealing with it than others. So I think if I was to sum it all up, I would say that we've had some real high levels of anxiety and panic to start with. Those have probably subsided to an extent. We've got quite, I guess, used to working in slightly different ways. There was certainly a sense of jubilation when New Zealand became COVID-free, but we know that that is unlikely to be the position for evermore. So I think that there's still quite a lot of anxiety around what the future looks like with respect to the economy, with respect to our jobs, and of course that has an impact on well-being and the psyche of everyone. So I don't think we're in the happiest of places yet, but I think that we've all learned a lot and come a long way. And so for that, I think we should all be quite proud and take some sense of satisfaction. But I think we've got a way to go, Stephen.
Yeah, I'd agree. We'll talk a little bit more about the legal landscape, but just your overall thoughts about New Zealand as a whole. How do you think this might change us moving forward?
I think we have had to learn to adapt and be more agile. And so I think it has probably meant for New Zealand as a whole that we recognise we have to be probably a lot more self-sufficient. We've certainly seen what happens with being dependent on food supply chains, on tourism for much of our business and economy. I work in the primary industry sector, so obviously huge impacts there with respect to exports and what we do abroad in terms of our globalisation of our food supply chains. So I think that the big changes for New Zealand are probably around understanding our place in the world. I think we're a very small country, but that of course brings great benefits when you look at how we've dealt with COVID. And so I think that that is certainly a positive lesson to take away. But I think other lessons are that we need to really be, I guess, what's that quote? I suppose, thinking anew and acting anew as things change. So I think the big changes are going to be how we recover from this, how we reignite our economy and restart, knowing that we may have difficulties opening our borders and the impact that that will have on us being sort of so remote and so small compared to the rest of the world, which has both some positives but also a lot of downsides as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Very insightful. Thanks, Lisa. So the legal landscape, I'm sure as you have experienced, as have I, has been evolving and changing over the past several years anyhow. What do you predict, or what are your thoughts might happen next?
I think, I work in the prosecution space, so it was really impressive to see how the courts, I guess, were incentivized to act through the use of virtual technology. So the fact that we were able to continue to have courts sitting, albeit remotely, over lockdown and throughout was something that was really impressive. I know within New Zealand, in particular within the justice system, the courthouse is seen as a place which serves the community and where the community should all be able to go. But from my experience, and certainly working in the UK, they've made huge inroads into using virtual technology and having remote virtual courtrooms and evidence being given across LiveLink for a number of years now, actually, for over a decade. And I hope and think that that's probably technology that we will want to embrace here in New Zealand. So I see that as being a big change. And I also think that as many law firms and within government have experience within their legal departments, that just more remote working more flexibly, using technology to deliver the services for clients in new and different ways is something that we'll all be taking forward from our sort of lockdown experiences. And I think in the next few years, we'll just start to see a lot more of that. Because having, I guess, tapped into this technology, it would be a real shame to lose it completely, I think, and to go back to how things were.
So you've segued nicely into my question, which is around looking forward, some of those opportunities, and equally perhaps some of the challenges. So any other thoughts around how we can capitalise on what we've learned?
I think one of the biggest, I guess, one of the biggest negative criticisms that the justice system and legal system often faces is around access to justice. So I think that when you look at delays within the court system, delay being one of the main reasons why justice often isn't served, because cases take so long to come to hearing, and by then, people, one, can't remember what occurred several years ago, but also I guess for a variety of reasons, litigants drop out, which ultimately means that justice may not be served or may not be served well. I think that if we are able to better manage cases so that we don't have to have as many hearings, we don't have to have everything done in person within the confines of a courtroom, I think that would be hugely advantageous in terms of access to justice and maybe reducing some of those delays. So that probably is where I think things might go, and where I think the legal profession could really benefit. There's a lot going on in this space, obviously, abroad, and a lot that New Zealand can learn from when looking at countries who are already pioneering a lot of virtual courtroom technology, to some extent perhaps using a degree of artificial intelligence in some more minor matters, so that they may not require actual hearings and actual judges sitting on I'm talking about very minor matters, but I think using technology for things like infringement systems, just so that people can have easier and better access, is a way that we could improve things. I think technology will certainly be one of the things that we need to work hard on in the legal profession in order to keep up with the pace of what is happening around the world and what is happening more generally in people's lives.
Absolutely. So that the concept of adaptation and constantly evolving. Yeah,
and as we know, it's evolving at a breakneck speed. When you look at what's happening in other areas of in other professions, and so the legal profession should be no different, and it will need to keep up.
Absolutely. And so, of course, COVID-19 and what we saw happen worldwide thrust the concept of health and well-being into the spotlight. And you and I have talked about this many times, it becoming more of a priority for organisations. And as we know, it's a vital part of organisational performance. So what are your thoughts about how, as a profession, we can continually enhance that?
I think it should always be front and centre. I think if there's one thing that COVID has probably taught all of us and any business, no matter what profession you're in, not just in law, is the importance of having, I guess, a collegiality within teams, because it was those support networks and those teams that probably thrived and survived better because they were able to collaborate and coalesce and unify in a lot easier than those teams that perhaps weren't as well connected and able to do that. All teams, I think, and all professions had to just become more agile because they were faced with these circumstances and they had no other choice. But I know within our organisation, daily catch-ups became the norm, and they have actually continued even with everyone returning to the office and returning to work. I think those catch-ups were important on a number of levels. They helped direct the business as it was coming in each day, and of course there was a genuine business need that had to be served. But importantly, they allowed teams and colleagues and managers to check in with one another. And I think that's the health and well-being piece that I think is really important. So while we have embraced technology, and now we have perhaps more flexible, more remote working because we've become far more equipped with better technology to enable us to work remotely, we have to be careful that we don't allow that technology to mean that people feel isolated. And so, remote working can bring a degree of isolation. And so it's really important, I think, now that probably more important than ever before, that while we on the one hand embrace flexible working and technology, we remember to keep the connections between staff, because those connections are all important when it comes to well-being, I think. And that's something that I think has to be embraced by organisations, not just in the legal profession but everywhere.
Totally. The importance of connection and creating a community and looking after each other whilst you are correct delivering on the business. So personally, what tips have you got? What have you done to keep yourself moving and resilient?
I think I'm probably not the greatest example for moving. It's a great example for baking and cooking. Probably not so great for moving. My partner and I play tennis, so we were really disappointed not to be able to get to the tennis courts over lockdown level 4, and delighted when they reopened again. We did go for walks. We live on a steep hill, so the moment you walk out the door, and if you choose to turn left and go up the hill, which is what we tried to do, then we were walking, and even if we went down the hill, we had to come back up. So there was a bit of that. You're absolutely right, though. It's super important, I think, to have the balance between work life and personal life. And for me, probably one of the greatest challenges over lockdown personally was making sure that I had that balance. So it was actually a really busy time for me work-wise, and I could work from home remotely without too many distractions. I've got a study here, but the danger was remembering when to stop and to take those breaks and to switch off, and to ensure that you still have got the separation between work and home life, even if your workstation happens to be at home. So so we weren't always outdoors, but we did take breaks, and I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit it, but there were some pretty epic Monopoly games, and there was obviously a bit of Netflix watching. And from my perspective, there was a lot of baking and cooking. I'm not sure if that was so healthy, but it just those were all things that meant that my mind was taken off from work. And I think that's the important thing, that you're doing something that gives you pleasure and takes you out of the work zone. The other thing that I think is really important, and that I have always tried to lead by example with my staff, is to ensure that weekends and out of hours working remains your own time. So I think with everybody working more flexibly and perhaps working more flexible hours, there is a danger that we have constant noise, I guess, because understandably emails and particularly emails will come at all times of the day. And sometimes, in my line of work, there will be urgent work that has to be dealt with out of hours as well. But for the most part, I try to ensure that there still is that balance, to be respectful to those who work part-time hours, so that people do have the opportunity to turn off. That for me, I think, is the most important thing when it comes to resilience. Everyone has their own way of turning off, and it might be fitness for some, baking for others. I do Pilates and play tennis, and cook and bake, but whatever it is, it's important that you have that uninterrupted time to do it, so that you're not constantly feeling chained to work, I think.
Hugely important, having the ability to focus and, as you've mentioned, take time for you.
Yeah,
recharge.
Just that rest and recuperation. Yeah.
Totally. So a tough question, I know, Lisa, but reflecting back on what has occurred, if you were to think about perhaps the biggest learning or the biggest insight you've had over the past sort of period of lockdown and coming through it, what will you take forward?
Probably the biggest learning was, if it wasn't always already abundantly clear to me, and I think it is, a real people person, was just how important people are to the job that you do, and particularly in a crisis or in any situation, how important the people that you work with are to getting the business and you on a personal level through all of that. So I felt really grateful to be, I'm in an acting role at the moment, and so as a result of that, I was almost part of 3 teams. So I had the privilege of joining, I guess, 3 teams in terms of daily catch-ups and being involved in what others were doing across lockdown, kind of triple and triplicate. And in each of those teams, I think the real strengths were how people pulled together and connected and supported one another. And that was also as true in my personal life, I suppose, with being separated from family and having to get, relatives who were in their late 70s and 80s equipped with using video technology and downloading apps and having to explain all of that remotely with no easy feat. But the importance of keeping those connections alive over lockdown and when you're remote was hugely important. And probably the biggest learning that I took from my lockdown experience was just how important people are and people are to our lives. And so I think that's always what's central to any health and wellbeing piece as well. Yes, we're all here to do a job. Yes, we're, I work in a huge organization, so you can feel maybe sometimes like a small cog in a big wheel, but we're all people at the end of the day, and it's really important to remember that. So it's probably the biggest takeaway for me, that and the fact that our house became effectively ISO 31000 compliant in terms of risk management, and I'm very proud of that. So we introduced all sorts of risk systems into the home, and my pantry and fridge has never it's something that I think anyone would be proud of. Everything is labelled and packaged and is decanted, and so the fact that I learned, I just was so concerned about all of the huge amounts of recycling that we produced. So it was a personal mission to become more self-sufficient and to use less and to buy less packaging, less of everything in packaging, mainly because of the COVID risk, but also just from a kind of looking after our planet perspective as well. So that was a personal learning that I took from it all.
Oh, well done, well done. And what a nice place to end. I really love your philosophy around people first, and if we can be humane and connect and support each other, as well as, of course, challenge and drive business forward, then hopefully, we'll be setting ourselves up for a sustainable future.
Could not agree more, Stephen. That's exactly what I think. And the Prime Minister said it, and that was kind of the said it, and I think it really resonated. Stay home and stay safe, but be kind. And I mean, it probably sounds a bit trite now because we've heard it so much, but I think you genuinely need to model those behaviours and try and live and embrace that philosophy. And if you do that, then I think we will, all workplaces, if everyone embrace that, then I think we would all be much happier and much more effective in the way that we work. So.
Definitely. Hey, Lisa, thank you. As always, it's a great joy to chat. I always enjoy our chats and sharing philosophies, and it's so cool to have people like yourself within law forging ahead and pushing change and supporting our people as you do. So a real pleasure.
Oh, real, and with you also, Stephen. Always a real pleasure to talk, and thank you. It was a pleasure to be a part of this and a privilege. Oh. Thank you.
You're most welcome. And that's me signing off.